find such a love at our age. Whoever thought we could dance on a
Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I'm your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. Judy, what is the topic for today?
Finding the right person sometimes becomes the problem. An interview with Dr. Andrea Medaris.
Yes, indeed. And we just had that interview. And if you're intrigued by that concept, which we certainly were, I really like it. It's really kind of cool. And you'll hear in the conversation, Andrea comes, her main modality she works in is emotionally focused therapy for couples. And emotionally focused couple
Couples,
therapy. That's what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a lot of fun, certainly for me, because I could easily map on a lot of my favorite ways of describing things into hers.
Sounds like you two work very similarly.
We do work we use different terminology a lot, but we do work very
But
similarly.
You have a very similar outlook.
Yes,
and approach
indeed.
to therapy.
And among other things, our respective biases, which I'm not even going to reveal now.
No,
so let
we
people
want you to
watch
see
it. Yeah,
those.
our respective biases, and I'm using that word advisedly, with respect to couples, really line up quite well too. So before we do that, though, I want to trumpet my announcement of a free resource you can get from my website. That's brucechalmer.com. If you are having issues in your relationship and you feel kind of stuck, I created a very simple, it takes you 2 minutes to do it, a little rating scale or rating rubric for you to fill out, and then some guidelines on how to interpret what you find that lead you rather directly into figuring out, okay, how might you proceed? It gives you some very concrete approaches on how to proceed. How might you get a hold of that particular resource? All you have to do is go to brucechalmer.com, look on the page for a little section that says something about free resource available that makes it obvious. You'll click on it. It's called a relationship clarity check. And so you can click on that and you will get it by email. And I hope you will find it useful. And before we go further, let us put in a plug for your book.
Oh, that would be The Blue Tent, Erotic Tales from the Bible by Laria Zilber.
Laria Zilber, spelled Lariazylber. Why do I spell it out? So that you can go to lariazilber.com, where you can find information about the book, including some rather teasers. We see in putting the teasers on the website, we stop just short of where it gets super juicy. Because that would be too much for a website that anybody can access. Yes, it's sort of R-rated on the or maybe even PG-13. No, it's R-rated on the website. The book itself is definitely X-rated. It's very explicit and beautiful, by the way.
Thank
I don't
you.
want to just leave it at that. It's really beautiful.
Yes.
So do
It's lovely erotica.
It is lovely erotica, biblical erotica, which is
erotica. Yes.
its own genre. There's not very many representatives of it, and
No, there's not.
you're in there. Yeah, so that's great. So let's get on with our interview, and we'll see you on the other side.
Our guest today is Dr. Andrea Medaris. Dr. Medaris is a relationship psychologist and writer in Brunswick, Maine. She is director of the Center for Relationships at Psychology Specialists of Maine and a certified therapist and supervisor in emotionally focused couple therapy. For more than a decade, Dr. Medaris has helped couples understand the patterns that create distance and find their way back to connection. She writes the Emotional Logic newsletter and has written What You Wish For, a book about attachment and desire. She is co-host of the Desire Lab podcast with Caroline Hood, one of our previous guests. Andrea, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you. We always like to start off with our guests asking what sort of, how did you get into the work that you do? Tell us something about your own journey.
Sure. I think I was primed for this work pretty early. My parents divorced when I was a teenager, and I became very interested in what goes wrong between people who love each other. They always kind of told me make sure you marry your best friend, right? And they always had such, I thought, a beautiful relationship. And so it was very surprising to me when it didn't work out. And I've been kind of trying to figure it out, right, ever since. And then I met my husband in college and became interested in the other side of the question, what happens when we fall in love and what allows the bond to last. And I ended up writing my dissertation about falling in love with him.
Mm.
But I started out as a psychologist and pretty quickly found myself drawn to working with couples. Um, I was fascinated by the idea that couples could really love each other enormously and still get caught in these painful patterns where one person's trying to protect the relationship and somehow making the other person feel more alone. So once I
Mm.
found emotionally focused couple therapy, it just kind of clicked with everything that I had already experienced about myself as a therapist, really tuned in with how I wanted to work and gave me a map for understanding what all was going on with all of that. And that kind of became the center of my clinical work.
Mm. Wow. And we've had numbers of people who talk about EFT and some of the
Hmm.
basic concepts. And not to invite you to give a whole lecture here, but could you give our listeners sort of a overview of what emotionally focused couple therapy is all about?
Sure. So it is kind of primarily a humanistic model in that it really is not pathologizing. We don't diagnose anybody. And it's entirely about understanding how one person's behavior makes sense given their context and history and how it impacts the other person in a way maybe they didn't intend, and how those two people influence each other so that they are kind of participating in a cycle where the conflict goes back and forth very quickly. And I think most of us have had the experience of having the same fight, right, 500 times.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I know what I'm going to say. I know what you're going to say next. I don't even want to do my next line, but I know
Just
that's what I'm going to
do it
do.
by number, just say
Yeah.
argument number 17. Oh yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Actually, it's argument
totally.
number one over
Oh,
and
over and over again.
Over and over. Yeah. But it
Yeah.
feels like that, right? It feels like both. It feels like this is a new fight and like this is the same fight we've had over and over and over. And
hmm
so a lot of EFT is about mapping out that conflict. Why did you do what you did? What did you feel when you did it? What were you trying to do? What happened instead? And how
Mm.
did that become the stimulus for the other person to do what they do next?
Mm. Wow. So you said something, one of the things that we picked up on in the materials that we looked out of yours was you said of some couples, you found the right person, and that's the problem. I have to tell you, I want to preface it a little bit, Andrea, because it is we have the title of our podcast is Couples Therapy in 7 Words, right? And our
Right.
7 words: be kind, don't panic, and have faith, right?
Uh-huh.
And Judy has often pointed out there's a 4 word phrase that also really applies that I think is very wise. Also, you can say your four
What
words,
is it?
right person.
right?
So when we read this about you said,
And it was intrigued to see because I think that is so also so interesting and so wise. It's
Mhm.
like, yeah, find the right person doesn't say that isn't the whole story either, is it? And I really
Right.
like that notion. Sometimes that could be the problem. Could you explain that? Like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So I think a lot about fantasy, right? That we think about the person that we want long before we meet them. We have an
Mhm.
idea of what they're going to be like, and that can be kind of a surface idea about, they'll be tall and they'll have this, particular job or whatever. But there's also kind of a deeper fantasy of this is the person that will make me not feel like this. That
Mhm.
this is
hmm
the
Yeah.
person who can heal something in me that is missing or broken or, hurt. And when we find that, it feels like magic. This is
Mhm.
my way out of the darkness. This is the way that I no longer have to feel like I'm too much for other people. This person thinks I'm the right size, right? Or I don't have to be afraid that nothing I do is good enough because this person is satisfied by me. Right? And so we're often drawn to kind of our counterparts. And this is the idea behind, what's getting a lot of press these days, the whole avoidant attachment, anxious attachment pairing, right? And it's very common
Yeah.
pairing. And it's a common pairing because they complement each other,
Hmm.
right? If you are more anxious, I am, that then you're drawn to somebody who's stable, who
Yeah.
feels like a calm center, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
are drawn to your emotional vitality and life, and those things feel really powerful. And then later, after that initial yay wears off, then it almost becomes like the fault line where that conflict runs along the same things that you chose because they could heal something in you are now the things that are hurting you, right?
Well, yeah, especially because the actual person you're with, as opposed to the fantasy person, turns out to be a genuine human being. I often,
Right.
in my first sessions with folks, I'll say, let me check my notes. You are both human beings, right? People generally laugh at that. Actually, these days, you can't even be sure anymore, can you? It's like,
I suppose
oh my
not.
God, we might all be avatars. I don't know. We're all
Or
AI
furries.
beings.
Yeah.
Well, there's that. Yes, there's that one too. Yeah, that's right. That's true. They may not even identify as human beings.
That's
That's
right.
another story. But
Yes.
no, it's interesting that phenomenon of anxious and avoidant attachment sort of tracking each other. The other thing I like to note about that, the causality arrow works the other way too. Those a little bit of difference there amplifies. So
Hmm.
everybody's different from everybody. And so that fault line you're finding are the very places where the friction happens. That's going to amplify those differences. And
Right.
one of I think attachment theory is such a useful phenomenon. And but the other part of me, I it's not very well hidden, is it? The skeptical part of me, the not very well hidden part. I used to be a statistician before I was a psychologist, actually, way back in the day.
Yeah.
And that part of me is saying, yeah, but don't take those labels too seriously. And when people do, that causes problems too. I guess you're you're familiar with that
I
phenomenon.
fully agree with you. I
Yeah.
think that is completely true. And that's one of the things that kind of worries me about attachment theory being so mainstream right now, right?
Yes. Yes.
TikTok
It's
is
the answer to
obsessed with
everything.
it.
Yeah.
Yes. And everybody is really like, oh, I'm this, you're that. I should never be with an avoidant because, whatever.
Yeah.
And um, it isn't fixed. The whole point of attachment theory, in my mind, is that they're working models. They're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to update on experience. And that's how they were formed in the first place. And we're
Mhm.
still always learning. And that's the hope inside the trap to me. If we're pulled towards somebody that where that conflict is coming from, the same qualities we longed for, that doesn't mean the gifts they have to give us are lost to us.
Mm. Yeah.
If we can repair that and find a way to engage in a different way, we get to access all of the stuff that we chose them for in the first place.
Yeah, and that takes us to your upcoming book, What You Wish For. You want to talk about that a little bit?
I feel
I know
like I
you,
already am.
well, you covered a
I
little
mean,
bit of that. What else can you tell us about that?
yeah,
Aside from fantasy person that you end up with and then find out, oops.
yeah. Oops, oops. Be careful what you wish for, right? But also that initial fantasy, like I think what you were saying is a good point about how what we fall in love with initially is kind of a projection, right? It's kind
Mhm.
of a I wish you were this thing, and I'm going to pretend like you are for a little while. And in that early, intense phase, it really seems like it might be.
Mhm.
The other person's kind of rising to that idea. And so it's a real shock when it falls apart and you find out they're human after all. And so are
Hmm.
you. Now you have to show them all the things that you were hiding, right? But um, so the book kind of goes through the whole lifespan of the love story. So it starts off in childhood in the attachment theory part, where this is how you learned what you learned about love. Goes through that falling in love period. That was what my dissertation was about, the whole
Mhm.
drugs period, where we're just drunk on dopamine all the time.
Mhm.
Fun and tiring. And, then the conflicts section about how those conflicts come from those same qualities. And then what the repair looks like, right? What's
Mhm.
a corrective experience look like in adulthood? If we have a partner that can prove wrong some of the fears that we hold, that we all have. If my greatest fear is that I'm, too much for other people and I'm too needy and I get that message from my partner when we're having the conflict,
Mhm.
Hmm.
if I can come to him in a vulnerable way and say, I'm really scared I'm too much for you. and my heart is open when I do that. And he responds in a different way and says, "No, actually, you're not." Right? My fear is that I can't show up in the right way. Right?
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
what does that
So
change for me?
if your partner doesn't live up to your expectations, is that over, or is there ways you can work with people on getting through that? Oh yeah, that was my fantasy person, but not so much now.
Yeah. I
How do you
mean,
get past that?
it kind of depends on the ways in which they're not doing it, I feel like.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I think that's the experience of maybe most of us, right? That we, for at least for a time period, we feel that way, that this person isn't what I thought. And they're not the be all end all answer to everything,
Mm.
right? But then I think that's where the repair comes in, because if they can meet you in that place and tell you a different story, it's like kind of like all the other stuff doesn't feel as important, right? The
Mhm.
ways in which they fail you um, feel like little blips instead of a big,
Yeah.
huge deal.
That's one of my favorite topics I talk about. We did a podcast on it actually, is the concept that the relationship skill that's all relationship problems, not too grandiose, right? Is the ability to be mildly annoyed, which is
Yes.
exactly with what you're talking about,
Yeah.
and that of course the causality arrow points both ways. The
Hmm.
How can one be mildly annoyed if it's so it seems trivial in light of how grateful you are to have this other person in your life. And,
Right.
so that phenomenon when you go to someone and say, am I too much for her? Or am I too annoying? Or, what's going on? And what you get from them, you're, you're not going to get, or probably shouldn't get, oh no, you're never annoying. Because I
Right.
think the constant is God knows we're all annoying, except for Judy. She's never annoying, but I am
Of
annoying.
course.
I do always like to point that out. You know this. I always like to point out that Judy requires that skill of tolerating, mild annoyance much more than I do because I'm so much more annoying. So you know, that's one of the many reasons we get along great because she's really good at that.
You good at that?
Just nice about it. But
You're too kind.
I'm too good. But no, but that phenomenon of recognizing, it puts it in, like you said, it becomes little blips.
Hmm.
And of course, the flip side of that is when there is when people are in that deep sense of doubt about whether this person really can be emotionally who I need, then everything is evidence that they're not. And that
Totally.
really becomes a vicious cycle.
It definitely does.
Yeah.
I think we have a kind of common refrain in my practice of, when you are connected, there's really very little that you can't solve. And when you're disconnected, everything is a problem.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
that's
exactly. Yeah.
completely true. The
Yeah.
context really determines how we feel about what's going on. I
Yeah.
think about all the time, like if you, wake up late and you're stressed out about getting to work on time, and you go in and you make your lunch, and then you take the mayonnaise jar out of the fridge and drop it on the floor and it shatters and the mayonnaise goes everywhere. It feels like the end of the world, right?
Mhm.
Like, uh, this is the worst thing that could have happened. Now there's this huge mess. Now I'm going to be even later. This is terrible.
Hmm.
Right. And on another day, you slept really well and you got up early and went to the gym and you feel awesome and the sun is shining. And it's really nice outside and you're so excited to get into your day. And then you drop the mayonnaise jar. Well, it's annoying. It's mildly
Stuff
annoying.
happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not the things that are the problem most of the time. It's the context that things are happening in.
Yeah. That phenomenon that when you're connected, you can solve pretty much anything. The term I use for that sort of connection is intimacy.
Yes.
Intimacy, and one of my favorite things to point out is that intimacy can be terrifying. That, the chief skill of intimacy is to tolerate anxiety rather than freak out, and rather than avoid it.
I
And that
love
in
that.
avoiding anxiety, that's often what leads to people basically doing away with intimacy, which itself becomes destabilizing. It's a problem. So,
Hmm.
how do you help people? You were talking about repair experiences. How do you help people reestablish that connection when they feel like it's lost?
Very, very carefully, very
Mm,
slowly a lot of the
yeah.
time. But I think trust in the beginning is built out of a series of successful risks, right?
Mm,
they they're little ones, but every time we tell someone something they didn't know about us, it's a little bit of a risk. Maybe they won't like it. Maybe they'll back off. And we take risk after risk, and they get a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, and the trust gets bigger correspondingly. Right? And so later on, when that trust is damaged or, the bond doesn't feel secure, then it's hard to take the next risk. And so I think a lot of therapy is doing little risks like that. And that's at least where my therapy model comes in is it's built out of all these, we call them enactments, right? Where I work with one partner and have them get really clear on how they feel about something, why they did what they did, why it makes sense. And then I say, can you turn to your partner and tell them that? Can you tell
Mm.
them what you just said?
Hmm.
And they're like, no.
Even if they've been sitting there in the room, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
I know. Yeah, it is amazing. Yeah.
They're like, it's too risky, it's too scary, right? And so that's where the therapy comes in of me kind of trying to support the part of them that wants things to change enough to have that hope overcome the fear a little bit so
Yeah.
they can take a little risk, build a little trust, and build a little snowball, a trust
Hmm.
snowball where down in later in the therapy, or we call stage two, right, is the big risks, right? Those deep
Mm.
core fears. And can you tell me that this thing isn't true? Or can you tell me that you're going to be there for me?
Mm.
Those things are really, really scary to ask for.
Hmm.
So we kind of have to build up to it.
Yeah.
How can couples tell the difference between a relationship that's hard but healable and one that's actually over?
which
Mm,
which I which I have to throw in is another one of my relatively recent favorite topics because I have a whole course, video course I developed on discernment, sort of based on Bill Doherty's discernment model.
yeah.
I have a whole course I did on that. So yeah, I'm curious, how do you help folks with that?
I think I tend to think about it as how much gas you have in your tank still.
Mm.
I think I've run into this a lot where couples come in to therapy after 35 years of cycle, right?
Mhm.
Conflict cycle, that same fight over and over and over and over for decades. And they're exhausted, right? And a lot of times, you know, we often see, what we call a pursue withdraw pattern, right? One person kind of pushing for resolution, asking more questions, often being critical, one person kind of backing off, shutting down, going quiet, not really responding that much. And when that pattern repeats for decades, it gets pretty entrenched, and people come into therapy on the cusp of maybe we're done here.
Mhm.
Right? And a lot
That's
of
something John
times,
Gottman's likes to point out a lot.
yeah.
And he has this one. Uh, I actually tracked it down. I tracked down the thing he keeps referring to. It's from the early 90s by a graduate student or something. I'm sure it's
Hmm.
way out of date, but nevertheless, and I remember the, the punchline, the exact number, but he says the average number of years that a couple has been having problems before they go in, I forgot, it's some number like 5 years or 7 years or something
Hmm.
like that, which of
Yeah.
course is what you're describing.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just, I think I tend to see people either 2 or 3 years in or 30.
Hmm.
Right. I could be your early intervention, or we really didn't ever want to go to couples therapy, but now we're about to get divorced.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so
That's
a
true.
lot
Yeah,
of
it's,
times,
I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think that's pretty similar to what I see as well. Yeah.
Mhm. So a lot of times at that point, they're kind of saying maybe we're just incompatible. Maybe we can't do this. And then I drop my thing that nobody likes to hear and say, I think everyone is incompatible. I don't
Well, that's an
think.
I see. I like that. One of my books, the subtitle of one of my books is "Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy Is Wrong," and I
Yeah.
apply that to myself as well. So I love that statement. Everybody's incompatible. Could you? What do you mean by that? Oh, and I
Oh,
actually have to say, what's his name? Alan do something or other. I can't think of his name. Who wrote a book called "Why You Will Marry the Wrong Person," which I'll bet is on a similar theme.
I bet so. Yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
read it. I don't know who that is either, but
Yeah.
um I think, well, we're different people for one thing. So there's a fundamental incompatibility in that. But I think we purposely, like I said, choose people who are different on purpose, right? We want
That's a
someone,
feature, not a bug. Yeah,
yeah,
that's yeah.
we want someone who can expand who we are. We want someone who can make us be more, to teach us how to love in a different way. We want to grow and expand and evolve that way. And so we choose someone who can help us do that. And to do that, they have to be really different from us.
Hmm.
And so I think almost every couple is pretty incompatible,
Uh-huh.
really.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Now, I do, and one of the things I distinguish, sort of a basic distinction I make, it's artificial, but it's kind of logical. I have a logical definition of it, is the difference between deal breakers and growing pains.
Mm,
And what I would translate what you just said into, well, everybody's got growing pains. Everybody has
yeah.
differences that can become friction points. Deal breakers, I define very narrowly as things that really are incompatible. The ones, and it's really surprising how many couples I will see where they're like 5, 6 years into the relationship and they haven't really said if they want to have kids or not. And they're
Yeah,
each
that's definitely one
assuming
of
one
them.
thing and there turns out they're incompatible. And
Yeah.
unless somebody changes their mind, or, so that's a classic, incompatible sexual orientations.
Mm, hmm.
Without going into any detail, I have a little experience of that in my first marriage. Let's just leave it at that. Both my ex and I have gone on to marry really wonderful women, and we're both a lot happier. Let's put it that way.
That's awesome.
So I learned something about that one, but
Yeah.
but that is, that's a classic deal breaker also. When
Hmm.
you encounter it, if you face that, it's like, it's not going to work, is it? You can be two good people who even love each other, but
Sure.
it's just not, that sort of thing's not going to work. So there, some things are actual deal breakers,
Yes.
but I classify anything that isn't a logical deal breaker like that, as a growing pain.
Hmm.
Even, the severity has nothing to do with it. No matter how severe the fights have been, in theory, you could heal. I'm not saying you will,
Yeah.
but at least in theory, it's a growing pain.
Yeah. I think those are perfect examples of deal breakers. And I think the only thing I might add is that situation where one person or both really are actually out of gas,
Yes,
right?
indeed. Yeah,
When you
of
have
course.
tried too long, you don't have any more to give, you're done, right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
There's really not much you can do at that point, which is
yeah,
a bummer. It's hard
yeah.
because I think you could have
Hmm.
probably, right? You could have intervened earlier and
Hmm.
probably done something about it. And it's not that the people are incompatible,
And they
but
often even
now,
know that. They often
hmm,
even know, wow, if we had tried this 25 years ago, we might have been okay.
right.
Yeah, and those are folks that can heal also, even though it may mean separately. I mean, I always
Yes.
like to see that, and it's always interesting evaluating the effectiveness of couples work because there are three different opinions at least. Ours as therapists being the least important of them. It's the couples, and their opinions are often different. So, but I might observe, wow, that seems to have been helpful work. They split up and one person was really realizing, yeah, that's what we need to do. The other person is just desperately disappointed because they were hoping it would save the relationship.
Yeah.
Is that a success or a failure? The answer is yes, sort of.
Yeah.
It's kind of both.
Yeah.
But those couples where, yeah, they one or both have run out of gas, they've realized they're still family. They're just not going to try and be a couple anymore, and they can heal and feel better. And sometimes those are the ones who can turn out to be pretty friendly, if not
Yeah.
actual friends. They can be okay.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, I hope that is what the outcome, right?
Yeah.
That you can keep what was good to some degree at least. And I think I really got into my own head a lot when I was first doing couple therapy because we went into it with the idea that, the success of the therapy was if I could make the relationship work.
Yeah.
And
Yes. Exactly.
uh
Yeah.
not always can't. But
Hmm.
I think the goal I have now is clarity, right? Getting to a place of I'm sure about whatever it is that I want next. And
Hmm.
maybe that is separating, maybe it's staying together. I hope it's staying together most of the time at least, but
Hmm.
if it's not, then it's not. And then we
See,
get clear about that.
you just described the same bias that I have, which I
Hmm.
think is notable. And again, I'll refer to Bill Doherty's research because your bias and as mine is to help people stay together.
Yeah.
And we all have biases. There is a substantial proportion of therapists, at least in his research, where they clearly have a bias the other way. Their
Yes.
bias is if you're not happy, why not split up?
Hmm.
It's ridiculous. Why waste your time on something that isn't going to work? And that can be problematic. Some of his research also showed that people in individual therapy, when they're dealing with couples issues, that actually makes splitting up more likely rather than less.
Yeah.
I've done
And
individual therapy also with folks, and I can see how that happens. I mean, it makes sense to me.
yeah, and when I've done individual therapy, I've felt a lot more like that. I think
Yeah.
when I hear about the relationship from one side, I'm going,
Right.
maybe get out of there.
Uh-huh.
Not that I would tell a client to get out of it, but that I felt like I leaned the other way. And,
Hmm.
I do a lot of collaboration with the individual therapists of my couple
Hmm.
clients. And, that's the part where I get nervous, right? When sometimes we have the opposite biases, right? One person, the
Yeah.
individual therapist is saying, get out. And I'm saying, no, no,
Mhm.
no, wait, it's not too late.
Yeah.
Then what do we do now? Right?
That's that. I suppose that's one of the reasons why that and my just being basically antisocial, I suppose, is I'm not totally, you know that, but one of the reasons why I rarely collaborate directly with individual therapists, not because I don't respect other people's work, of course I do, but because I think to my mind, it's sort of superfluous to the work. I don't, you know what I don't want is to get into the situations, and I've seen it happen, where the couple is arguing about what their therapists are saying.
Right.
They goes, well, my therapist says this, and my therapist says that. My therapist says you're a jerk. Well, my therapist says you're a jerk, or words, something to that effect. And I don't much care what the therapists think. I don't care I mean, they shouldn't care what I think.
Right.
I just want to help them figure out what they think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Yeah.
that's, well, I'm not a therapist, and I think that's, too often I hear from friends of mine will say, well, my therapist told me that I should blah, 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 fill in the blank. And I'm thinking, why is your therapist telling you what you should do? Isn't your therapist supposed to help you figure out what you should do? And, if I had a therapist that was telling me everything what to do, I think I would find another therapist.
Yes.
And
Although,
Yeah.
sometimes people do want to be told what to do,
oh,
but I
sure.
think a therapist should say, you got to figure that out.
Well, that's it. I
Yeah.
mean, it's funny. It took me. I've been in private practice for over 30 years, and it took me quite a while early on to stop being afraid of throwing out ideas to folks.
Hmm.
But I've always still, even more so, careful in tossing out an idea to be totally clear about. I don't know if this was a good idea or a bad idea. It's an idea that occurs to me, or I've talked with other folks and I've heard this. What do you think? But I genuinely, and I think this is crucial for all of us, really. The reason I don't tell people what to do isn't because I think I shouldn't. It's because I genuinely don't think I'm an expert in how they ought to live their lives. I don't
Hmm.
think I'm qualified. I don't think anybody's qualified, to tell someone what they ought to do. So that's the thing. When you hear one of your friends saying, "My therapist said this," yeah, I'll get a little sinking feeling too,
Mm,
because and it maybe I'm splitting hairs, but if somebody says, I was talking with my therapist about that, and I'm really thinking blah blah blah. Well, that sounds like okay, that's
hmm.
good therapy.
Right.
My therapist says I should do this, tells me, what do you care about your therapist? I mean, work with your therapist, but who cares what your therapist thinks,
Right.
Right.
But that can be a problem. And it's sort of
Yeah.
it's cultural, it's like as therapy has become way more mainstream, because again, over that 30 years that I've been working in this field long enough that I remember when it wasn't. And so that
Yes.
people wouldn't admit in quotes to being in therapy, 30 years ago in ways that now it's like if you're not, what's the matter with you?
But when
Oh,
I'm a former school principal and a retired school principal, so I mean, I would have kids that would tell that, I mean, as young as 8 and 9 years old would say, well, my therapist says, and it's like, and it's just very accepted, and it seems like everybody's going to a therapist.
Yeah. It's
yeah.
pretty common these days.
Yeah.
Mostly for the good, I think. But,
I hope.
Yeah.
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 Getting back to relationships.
Indeed. Let's do that.
Let's go back to, so I wanted to ask you, why does desire so often seem to go dormant in long
Mm.
relationships, especially for couples that, let's say, still love each other? And how do they get it, wake it back up and give it the juice that it needs?
You might say, how would they reignite the spark? But
You
that's
might
because I
say
wrote a
that,
book. I
but
wrote a book called Reigniting the
we're
Spark.
not here to plug your book, honey.
My book.
Well, then you've already answered the question. So, we should all just read your book, I guess.
Yeah, like so there you go. But
Yes.
just in case somebody can't get a hold of my book, what do you think? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, here's what I think. I think that we have a drive for exploration that runs alongside our drive for safety. And so when we talk about relationships, particularly as couple therapists, we often talk about safety. We talk about building a secure bond and reestablishing safety between you. And certainly that is a very good goal. But I always think, what is all that safety for? What do we need to be safe to
Mhm.
do?
Mm-hmm.
And back to attachment theory again, which I can never shut up about, but it's initially called a secure base for exploration,
Hmm.
right? That's the point, in my opinion, is that if we establish a secure base, we do that so we have a place we can go out and come back to. And a lot of times, what I think of as desire being lost is that exploration drive being stifled.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe because there's not enough safety, maybe because there's too much safety, right? Where we want to protect the bond so much that we don't really do anything outside of it. And then we get bored.
Yeah. Or even
So,
inside of it, in a
yeah,
sense that
right.
intimacy, yeah, that's, my favorite language is stability and intimacy. It's We're talking about the same thing there. That
Mm-hmm.
phenomenon, yes, that you need a secure base for exploration. Exploration is what intimacy is. It's wanting to interact. It's not
Yes.
just with another human being. It's interacting with an environment. My favorite metaphor about safety and intimacy is a plant. It has roots for stability, but intimacy is the energy for growth. And if somebody paves a
Yeah.
sidewalk over that, it's going to crack the sidewalk. And
Yes.
relationships will often crack a sidewalk rather than just die.
That's a
And
great
this cracking the
analogy.
sidewalk is sometimes an affair, sometimes it's fighting about everything, all of
Yeah.
that stuff. But yeah,
Right.
that fits very nicely into the attachment theory model. I
Mm-hmm.
really like that concept. Yeah, safety is important, but it's a secure base for exploration
Right.
because otherwise it just feels dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that if we can get to a place where we can explore from that base and within it, right, and bring that exploration and that kind of person we're evolving into back to the bond, that's where passion comes from.
Hmm.
That's where ongoing renewable desire comes from
Yeah.
is, oh, hey, look, you're different than you were yesterday.
Yeah.
What's that
Yeah.
about?
And so am I. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're both different. It's always new. When you're present and alive, it's always new. But of course, the drive towards safety is what makes people hesitate greatly before they do that. And sex is a great sort of great domain to think about that in things like fantasies. To
Hmm.
reveal to someone a fantasy that you're worried, oh wow, they're going to think I'm really weird or perverted or crazy or something.
Right.
That's a scary thing to do. But to fail to do that, to stifle yourself is a recipe for death, basically.
Hmm. Or a broken sidewalk.
Yeah, exactly. A broken sidewalk, and it gets hard to walk on. I
Yeah, it does.
don't know how far I can extend that metaphor, but there it
Pretty
is.
far,
Oh, I
Yes.
like it.
Indeed, yes. So, in a related question that I'm looking at things that I know you talk about, how can couples talk about things like sex, desire and sex, which are often astonishing, well, I should say astonishing, difficult to talk about. I shouldn't be astonished. I will put in a little anecdote here, which is I was at a training, I don't know, a couple of years ago on Zoom for, several hundred couples therapist type people all interested in couples therapy. And the trainer asked, "How many of you routinely bring up sex?" In the first or second session if they haven't mentioned it. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, of course, everybody, right? Nope. It was
No.
about 20%, 30%. Lots of people say, no, no, I wait for them to bring it up. It's like, are you serious? Yeah, anyway,
You're
so
kind of missing a whole thing there. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, please tell us about that. How can you invite people to take that risk and talk about
So in couple therapy or with each other, do you
it?
mean?
Either way.
Well, I think part of getting better at it is modeling it, right? And so I think that's part of what we do in couple therapy is talking
Hmm.
about it pretty calmly and in a easy way, right?
Hmm.
That we're demonstrating that we're comfortable saying, whatever words we're saying, how's the sex been? Is a completely casual question and they can answer it at whatever depth they feel like answering it at.
Hmm.
But that you're always kind of scaffolding that in couple therapy. In terms of couples talking to each other, I kind of think it's the same way you build trust and intimacy to begin with. You're taking little risks. Whatever
Hmm.
you can tolerate sharing, share that. And you don't have to share the whole shebang. If you have a really scary fantasy that you really don't want to tell them about, but you kind of want them to know you on that level, listen to that want, that I want to be known. How do I get there from here? Probably
Hmm.
not by hiding every single thing. So maybe I could tell them one little part,
Hmm.
one little thing. Or I could ask them about theirs and see if they want to tell me something. Or I could tell them something a little less risky, but that we're always, call it trying to kind of like slice it thin enough that it's a tolerable risk, but that it's still a risk that might be successful. Because if it is, then the next one's easier to take.
Yeah. Is certainly what can happen in couples therapy just by the phenomena you're describing, that you can talk about it and people sense that, if you're relaxed and talking about it and you seem to be curious wherever they want to go,
Hmm.
that's a huge entry point for them to be able to do it with each other as well. It's like, oh, it's actually okay to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
really
when
can't encourage that more. Like people do not talk about it enough with each other or in therapy. Sorry, Judy,
Absolutely.
you were going to say something.
So I'll put this out to the therapist there, that what if you have, a couple and one of them wants to try something that the other one deems really kinky, and the other one is like, "Oh, no, I'm out of my comfort zone."
Hmm.
Hmm.
And it just kind of pulls them apart, and the person says, "Well, that's why I didn't want to bring it up with you, because I knew you would react like that."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
How do
very
you
common.
what do you how do you handle that?
So I think it's a lot of unpacking what is uncomfortable about it.
Hmm.
What makes it feel bad? Is it scary that they want something you don't know about? Is it scary that you might have to do something that you don't want to do? Is it, you know, scary like maybe they like this instead of me? Maybe this turns them on because I don't.
Hmm.
There's a lot of risks in there, a lot of fears in there. And which one it is or which ones, are part of what we do about it. But I think part of it is kind of how much is this, this is an idea I had, or this is a part of me I really want you to know, or this is something I really need to, get off in general, right?
Hmm.
Then, are we talking about like a fetish situation where it's preventing you from having other kinds of sex? Or are we talking about just a thing you want to try and you want that not to gross your partner out,
Mhm.
right? And so a lot of it is talking about the way that you feel about the communication itself and what feels bad about it so that we can address whatever that is, right? Maybe if the fear is my partner isn't interested in me anymore and they're branching out into this direction because they're bored, then kind of reassuring that fear directly can open the door to having the conversation, which is all it ever
Hmm.
has to be. You don't ever have to do anything you don't want to do, right? But
Yeah.
that you
And
can talk
people are
about
often
it.
surprised at that concept.
Yeah.
But I will note, I mean, maybe it's obvious, one of the reasons that's so scary is that there is underlying the possibility that they are incompatible.
Mhm.
Mm,
I've encountered that. I have a favorite story I go to from early in my practice. I learned a lot. I'd only been in practice for 2, 3 years at that point. Met a couple where they were in their 50s, I think, which was older than I was at the time. And they were describing something else, and then they came around to the topic of their sex life, which had been problematic because the woman had discovered in her 30s that she's a sexual submissive, and what she required wasn't merely to be dominated, but to be humiliated. And her
mm,
big, gruff husband, they were kind of stereotypical. She was like this sort of a lawyer, I think. She was sort of the intellectual type, and he was this sort of construction worker type guy. But her big gruff husband could only pretend to do that because he couldn't bear to humiliate her, really. To him,
yeah.
that wasn't loving at all. And as soon as she sensed he was trying to do it to please her, it didn't work.
Hmm.
They, as far as I haven't seen them in decades. As far as I know, they stayed together. I don't know. They just found ways. One of the things they did was they went to conventions of people who were into that kind of stuff, and she
Hmm.
found other ways of getting that gratified. But it was fascinating to me. Sometimes you bump into stuff like that, and it's like, ooh, there's a fundamental incompatibility, which is why it's so scary to bring up, because so much more often, I think, everybody's different and it all changes.
Right.
And so much more often it's just about, I don't know, I've been thinking about this. I don't know. I just don't want you to freak out. It doesn't mean I'm going to insist on it. But what do you think?
Yeah.
That
Hmm.
sort of thing. If couples can do that, it keeps things alive.
Right.
That's how, because we all change. We all, something that I might have been afraid of at one point, I might find is fine, or vice versa. Something I used to think was really cool, I might stop liking.
Right.
So, that couples need to be able to do that. But it's scary for good reason, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Yes, it
Sure.
is for good reason.
Hmm.
And, maybe they like something you don't like, and
Hmm.
that's always the way it's going to be. And that's also okay too,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think that sometimes it's like a load-bearing situation, right? Where if you don't like what I like here, I gotta go. But I
Hmm.
don't think that's terribly common, actually.
Yeah.
Like, I think most of the time you can work around pretty much anything,
Well,
if
yeah.
there's,
I guess corollary to that, I think it is very common, near universal, that no two people's erotic orientations, to use a term that we learned from Joe Court, I
Right.
think, erotic orientations, no two people's erotic orientations are identical, and they
right.
change over time anyway. So
Yeah,
there's always some differences there, and some of those differences can be kind of fun, but they're also a little scary. And actually, a little scary is sort of part of what's erotic.
right.
The
We like a
erotic
little scary.
equation. That's
Yeah.
what's his name? Morin. Forgetting his first name. Anyway,
Right.
he died quite a while ago. But the erotic equation where attraction plus obstacles equals excitement.
Hmm.
It's that a little bit of fear in there is one of those obstacles. It's
Mm.
like, not sure, and it's kind of exciting, and it's also scary.
Yeah, yeah.
That
Yeah.
can be kind of sexy.
Yeah. A little risk is good.
Hmm. Yeah. So, how can people get in touch with you and find out more about what you do, or if they want to work with
And
you?
your
What can they do?
podcast and your books and
Yeah.
your
And
newsletter and all the
I'm
good
working
stuff.
hard on building that platform we all have to build when we write books.
Hmm.
But so you can find me at andreajmedaris.com. And if you can't spell Medaris, you can try theemotionallogic.com. That goes straight to my newsletter. Also, we just started a podcast, Caroline Hood and I, called The Desire Lab, which it launches in 3 days. Very exciting.
Which,
Uh,
as of the time we're
oh,
recording this,
yes,
it
will
will
be
come
after that.
out a little bit after that, so it should
Right,
be
so it's already
available.
out.
It should
Yeah,
already be out when
That's
you
you're
can
good.
hearing
find
this.
it
Yes.
right
By the
now.
time you hear this.
Yes. Um, and my eventual hopeful book is called What You Wish For, and maybe you'll be able to buy it one day. That'd be pretty exciting.
But that would be exciting. And we never know when people actually hear, see this or hear it,
Right.
because sometimes I know people download episodes that we recorded like 5 years
Years
ago.
ago, yeah.
Hmm.
So by the time some people seeing this, they can say, "Oh, I'll bet that book's available," and they'll find it, and there it'll be.
You should check just in case
That's
and
right.
get my Google results up.
Yes,
Yeah,
so the best way is to go to AndreaJMedaris.com,
that's
right?
right.
All
That's right.
right.
We will put that in the notes for this episode as well.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
so much for doing this.
My pleasure. This was really fun. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that interview with Andrea. I know we did.
We did indeed. It's really fun talking with her, and hope you learned a lot from that. So, before we head out, I want to put in another plug for my relationship clarity check. You can get at brucechalmer.com, and sign up for that, and you will get it very quickly. And it takes you 2 minutes to do, and it will. I hope for you, you will find it a very helpful resource in
Right, and
pointing
it's
you.
just for you. It's not like you're getting the answers and you're
No,
analyzing them.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally private. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
what you get when you get the email that has the thing in it, uh, what you'll get is guidelines for how to interpret your answers,
Mm-hmm.
and that will point you in what I hope is a very useful direction. So I do invite you to check that out. Please tell other people about our podcast.
Please do.
Our podcast website is.
CTin7.com. That's CT as in couples therapy, IN, the numeral 7.com.
Yep, ctn7.com. That's where you can have access to all of our past episodes. Where we're well into the 250s now.
Yes, we are.
We've been doing this for a while, and we've been having fun, and apparently people have been having fun doing it. At least
Yes, we have.
they keep on doing it.
We
So.
haven't said in a while if you have a topic that you would like us to talk about on the show, or if you yourself would like to be a guest on our show. please go to ctn7.com, and there's places to fill all that stuff out.
So until next time,
Remember, be kind
don't panic.
and have faith.